Hello, welcome to week 2 of the Start Your Novel course with Jessica Rinn. That's me. Thank you so much for signing up. I really hope you enjoyed last week's activities and learning. If you haven't yet signed up and you're just seeing this on YouTube, you can sign up by going to ferventinc.com/startyournovel. This is a completely free course. You're under no obligation for anything at all. You'll just be sent a workbook, a fully downloadable workbook with some bite-sized lessons. You can print them off and work on paper, or you can work on your computer. It doesn't matter, whatever works best for you. This week we're going to be talking about plot. So this is the Create Your Plot week. Plot is something really difficult sometimes actually for all authors. It comes easier to some than others. I personally always like to start with characters, which is why video 1 and week 1 was based very much on character, because I think once you know who your character is, you'll know what obstacles they might find the most difficult to face. And I think obstacles are the most important thing when it comes to plot, when you're seeing what characters are having to go through to achieve their own goal. Now, when it comes to planning plots, there are two main types of writers. So they're often called pantsers or plotters. So some people like to write by the seat of their pants, hence the name, and just make it up as they go along all the way to the end. And that works brilliantly for lots of people. Some people are plotters. Some people are very intricate plotters. And from the start, before they even write a word of their novel, they would have plotted out an entire timeline of what happens when, perhaps a rough word count for each scene, each chapter. And again, that works really well for lots of people. Unfortunately, neither of those two methods particularly work that well for me, because I am smack bang in the middle. I can't just work with no plan. It stresses me out. I worry about getting lost, tying myself up in knots. I have tried to do this before and it just has not worked. But on the other hand, I don't like having an incredibly strict plan to go by either, because as I said last week, as you write, your characters will change. You'll get to know them more. You'll have light bulb moments where you suddenly think, oh, I could have done this or I could have done that. And that's very hard to unpick if you already have everything written in stone. So I like to have a rough plan. I like to have an idea of where I'm heading. So I like to know roughly what the ending's going to be. I like to know what my inciting incident is going to be, that I'm going to talk about in a minute. I also like to know 3 main obstacles that my character is going to face, in ascending order, because I like the tension to be racked up gradually. I also absolutely imperatively need to know what my character's goal is for their whole story. What do they want? What do they want more than anything else? And are they going to get it? Because that is exactly what your readers will be reading for. They'll want to know if your character is going to overcome or not. So this week's activities are going to be based around pretty much what I've just said. You are going to think about what your character wants more than anything. What's their main goal? Then you're going to think of 3 big obstacles that come their way that stop them achieving that goal, or try to stop them achieving that goal. You're also going to think of an inciting incident, which again I'm going to talk about in a second. But I also really want you to check that those goals and those obstacles really fit your character and really create the most tension as well. Because if you find 3 goals that would be incredibly difficult for your character in particular to face, that's where a lot of the tension and a lot of the great pacing and everything like that is going to come in. So an inciting incident, that's something that happens towards the beginning of your story, quite often before the end of your first chapter. It needs to be compelling. It needs to be something that takes your character out of their status quo, which is another reason why last week I talked about character, because you need to know what their starting point is. So their status quo, Their normal everyday life includes things like where they live, what job they do, their relationship status, who they live with, their household status, everything that they're kind of doing as they're muddling along in their everyday lives. Something has to come along and disrupt that. So it's your job to find out what it is that could do that. It doesn't have to be anything really, really dramatic at all. It doesn't have to be. It can be, depending on the genre. It could be a murder, a body that's found under the carpet, anything like that. Or it could just be something as simple as your local shop running out of nappies or something that you really needed. It doesn't matter how dramatic the actual situation is. What matters is how that impacts your character. It needs to be something that matters to them for a particular reason. I go into more detail in the lesson, but have a little think about that, because I actually find them quite interesting. It doesn't have to be, the inciting incident doesn't have to be the obstacle that your character has to face for the whole of the rest of the story. It can be something much, much more minor, but it has to be something important enough to pull them out of their everyday lives and start them needing to change. It needs to make them realise that something has to give, or they have to change direction in some way, and that's what pulls them into the story. So I like to have a really good idea of what my ending is going to be in some detail. It doesn't have to be fully written, but I like to know roughly what my characters are heading towards. Some people like to have everything in stone when it comes to their last chapter or their resolution of the story. Some people actually write the last chapter first, which is really interesting and helps for some people, not so much me, because I do kind of like to write things in order, but that's just the way I do things. You have an experiment and see which works for you. It doesn't have to be a happy ending. You don't have to have to end your novel in a happy-go-lucky way, but it does have to be a satisfying ending. It does have to be something that satisfies your reader, because they've put all this time into reading your book, and if they're let down at the last minute with something that they just don't buy, they're going to be disappointed. So to avoid disappointing your readers, try to avoid too many coincidences. You don't want everything wrapped up too neatly, too conveniently. You don't want anyone coming along with a magic wand and just suddenly making it all better at the end. You want your ending to have come about that particular way because of your character's actions, not just because of something that's magically happened at the last minute. You also really don't want any new characters turning up at the end, especially if they're kind of instrumental in the ending, because the reader will be really, they'll feel cheated because they haven't got to know that character through the rest of the book. You also might want to have an idea about what could happen to your characters after the curtain has fallen, so after the novel has completely finished. You don't have to tell the reader everything that's going to happen afterwards, because they'll want to make their own minds up about some of it. But it might be nice for you to know, because that way you can drop just a few hints, and it will get the reader to think about a little bit about what the characters are doing afterwards. That will make them feel a little bit more like real people, and it will make the story world feel a little more real too, rather than just a book that they've been reading. One of the most important things when you're thinking about plot is to think about the structure of your book, because our brains are hardwired for stories. That's how we used to learn. That's how we've always passed down information to the next generation. Even before we could read or write, we learnt in stories. Now, our stories are also wired to accept stories a certain way. Our brains are designed to think about stories in a particular sequence. That sequence doesn't have to be chronological. That sequence does need to be structural. If you go onto Google or a search engine of your choice and have a look at narrative arcs and story arcs, you will see a vast array of diagrams, really good visuals that explain how stories work. Find the one that makes the most sense to you, because it took me a little while to find that out for me, but I found it absolutely groundbreaking. And as soon as I realised this, my stories took on a whole new kind of life, because I understood the way that I wanted to tell them. And once I realised how stories work, and I learned about narrative arcs, I started seeing them everywhere, and I realised that every book I read, every film I watched, every TV programme I was into followed this exact same arc. So it's worth having a look actually. Once you've had a look at the arcs online and looked at the diagrams, it's really, really worth paying attention to where you see them in other places in life too. What you can also do is plot, once you've decided what you're going to have as your inciting incident, once you've got your character's story goal, once you have got the 3 obstacles that you want to throw at them, you then want to have a little think about your midpoint. Now the midpoint of a book is the risky part because it can feel kind of flat. It can feel a bit boring because you've done all the exciting stuff at the beginning and introduced all your plot lines, introduced all your characters to your reader, but you haven't quite got to the end. You haven't got to the last exciting battle, the last obstacle they have to face. So there's a risk of it falling flat. So in the middle, it's always a good idea to have something a little bit different that changes the story in some way. It's often thought of as a midpoint reveal or sometimes a twist. It doesn't mean that your story has to have this unbelievable twist that no one saw coming. They're great, but you don't have to have them in every book. It needs to be something that's revealed either to the character that they might not have known before, or it needs to be revealed by the character. Perhaps you as the reader already knew, or perhaps you didn't, but it's something that comes out maybe as a sort of a bit of a shock in the middle of the book, but it needs to be something that changes the rest of the story in some significant way. So what we're going to do this week with all of your exercises is make sure you have an inciting incident. Make sure you've set your goals, make sure you've set your obstacles, your midpoint reveal, and you know what your ending is going to be, which is often called the resolution. Then I want you to find your favourite diagram that you found online of a story arc, and I want you to plot those points on the arc and then draw it out, put it on your wall, put it anywhere near where you're working, and you'll be able to see when you're writing whereabouts in the narrative arc that part of your story is. And it'll really help keep you focused as well. To week 2, and I hope you really, really enjoy all the exercises that I've set you. Make sure that you get onto the website, onto the Facebook page, and say hello, say how you're feeling about this week's activities, maybe share some ideas, what you've been up to, and support each other as well. Thank you, have a great week, bye!